Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Bruce Westerman and Ranking Member Raul Grijalva from the Committee on Natural Resources. Chairman Westerman, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cole and Ranking Member McGovern. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to testify. H.R. 5283 revokes a lease signed by the Biden administration to turn a unit of the National Park System over to New York City for the purpose of constructing a migrant tent city and prevent any further funding from being used to construct housing facilities or lease lands for housing facilities for illegal migrants on federal lands. Our national parks have rightly been called many things, including America's best idea. What they have never been called and should never be called is home to thousands of migrants who have come to our country illegally. If this sounds absurd to you, it's because it is. And yet, it's exactly what the Biden administration did earlier this fall when they signed a legally dubious lease to house more than 2,000 illegal migrants at National Park Unit property in New York City. When my friend from New York, Congresswoman Malliotakis, called me with this disturbing news in August, I thought it was unbelievable. She told me that the Biden administration was working to build a camp for illegal immigrants in a national park unit, and they had come to survey an area in her district along with others in the greater New York City area. Just a few weeks later, I went to New York for a site visit with Representative Malliotakis and Representative Gosar, who chairs the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee. We visited Floyd Bennett Field, which is a historic section of the Gateway National Recreation Area, a unit of the National Park Service. We were told Floyd Bennett Field was being evaluated as a location for housing illegal migrants. Notably, when we first heard about this issue in August, the issue of housing illegal migrants on Park Service land was supposedly a rumor. However, when we arrived at Floyd Bennett Field on September 18th, a lease had already been signed between the National Park Service and the City of New York 3 days earlier on September 15th. During our site visit, we met with National Park Service and Emergency Management Service officials who detailed their plans to turn the park into a tent city for migrants. A tent city, I should note, located next to a campground, a playground, an ice skating rink, and a military training facility that includes live munitions in an active flood zone. Here we are today, about 2 months later, and despite local outrage, as well as lawsuits filed by elected officials in New York City on both sides of the aisle, the migrant camp is open for business with tent shelters constructed for 2,000 individuals. On November 12th, the day the Floyd Bennett Field Migrant Camp opened, busloads of migrants arrived, and after setting eyes on the site, the majority of them immediately left. News reports indicate the migrants wanted nothing to do with the shelter and cited the remote and undesirable accommodations as to why they left. It is my understanding there are currently about 500 people living in the facility. I want to stress how quickly this action by the Biden administration moved. The evaluation and construction of this facility was not normal operations for the federal government or the National Park Service. Anybody who is familiar with NEPA knows that it can take years or even decades for projects to get the necessary approvals. And yet, in a matter of a few short weeks, this lease was signed, housing facilities constructed, and migrants are now living in the camp. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what the Legal Aid Society said earlier this month, and I quote, "Placing families with children at Floyd Bennett Field is a recipe for disaster. The city must abandon its misguided effort," end quote. If that's not enough for you, how about the Coalition for the Homeless, who said, quote, "Enormous tents filled with tiny cubicles in what feels like the middle of nowhere is not in any way an appropriate setting for families with kids. It's really unimaginable that anyone thought this was a good idea," end quote. And I would like to submit the full statements from these organizations into the record along with the testimony the Natural Resources Committee received in opposition to this proposal from elected Democrats and Republican leaders from New York City, the U.S. Park Police Union, and several news articles about this issue. This isn't just about protecting our parks. This is also a safety issue for the local community. As I mentioned earlier, the tent facility is located right next to a playground. The park police have already testified that they do not have the manpower to patrol this area and that safety is a huge concern. Local parents are so concerned they've already pulled their kids out of a local Sea Cadets program at Floyd Bennett Field. If we allow this to happen in New York City, what's to stop the administration from expanding this model and housing migrants at the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone or even Minuteman National Historic Park in the ranking member's home state? I encourage the committee to report a favorable rule that supports this legislation, which would revoke this misguided lease and prevent any further funding from being used to construct facilities or lease lands for housing facilities for illegal migrants on federal lands. This bill is vital to protecting our parks and communities from bearing the brunt of the Biden border crisis. Thank you, and I'm ready to answer questions at any time.
Thank you very much.